So a question I'm going to ask all of you to ask within yourselves this morning: what is it that brought you here to Grace? Not this particular morning. Unless you're a first-time visitor, find one of these two awesome pastors. They'd love to connect you to the life of this congregation. But what is it that drew you to Grace as your home church? I've asked a couple of you that already. I've gotten answers from. I've been here since 1960-something. I showed up a couple of months ago as your pastor. There's a bunch of different reasons why people gravitate toward a church. We would like to think, as good Presbyterians, that people grew up as a Presbyterian in Ohio or North Carolina or in California and then found their way to the closest Presbyterian congregation. If that's true, raise your hand real quick. Not many of us. Not many, which is great, So some of you came here because it said Presbyterian on the website or on the front, and you said, I'm Presbyterian, I'm going to find my way to a Presbyterian church. Many of you came here not because it was Presbyterian, not because you had some affinity to the denomination. You came here because you felt like it was home. If that's true, raise your hand. You can be both, by the way. You can be both. So thank you. Thank you for coming and sharing your life and gifts in ministry with a congregation like this one. Whatever camp you fall into, I grew up cradle Presbyterian like myself in San Jose, California, or this was the place because I saw what they were doing in the community. They had an imprint on what was happening outside these walls, and I wanted to be a part of that. Either way you came to this congregation, somebody somewhere had to speak a little bit of faith into your life that excited you to say, I want to explore this thing of the divine. I want to know more who this Jesus Christ figure was. Somebody somewhere helped frame those things for you, which landed you here, thankfully, at Grace this Sunday morning. The beautiful thing about our faith is that it is a story. It's not a bunch of dogma. It's not a bunch of rules and guidelines that we're supposed to follow. It's a story. A story that started billions of years ago. A story that we already know the conclusion to, but we just find ourselves somewhere here in the middle. To carry on this rich and deep story, but also to add our flavor to it a little bit. The beautiful thing about a story, one that means something to you, that has an impact on your personal life, the beautiful thing about stories is they come from a special place inside of us, a place of love. We share stories because we love them. We share stories because something about that story is contagious. We want it to pass it around. We want to share it with other people. There are probably things in your life that you love, and that you love to share the story about what those things are. For me, the main one of those is the form of music that I appreciate most. I'm what you call a hip-hop head. I listen to every kind of new hip-hop that comes out today. Keep up to date on it. But as I think back about that story about how I fell in love with this art form, a profession that drove me before seminary to go work in Brooklyn, New York City, to put on the Brooklyn Hip Hop Festival and work with record labels. I had the passion to be part of the music. I love the story. And in hip hop, it is all about storytelling. So one of my favorite groups of all time is a group called the Wu-Tang Clan from Staten Island, New York. And the Wu-Tang Clan was so unique and different because these kids who grew up in East New York and Brooklyn and on Staten Island would trek into Times Square to watch old kung fu videos in Times Square when it was movie theaters back then. So they had this passion for the storytelling of kung fu movies, but they wanted to have this gritty street New York feel to the music. So in their studio, which was somebody's basement, they would take old rusty paint cans and drop them on the ground. They would fill buckets with waters and nails and make those be the drum beats to add this texture and layer to their music. Beautiful, beautiful music and album. So their first album is called Enter the 36 Chambers. I fell in love with this album in 1995 in middle school. Do you know what medium I listened to this album on? What would you think? 1995. I'm listening to it on what? A cassette tape. Anybody who's out there under like 25? You probably have no idea what a cassette tape is. I would put the cassette tape, put my Walkman on, walk to school. The A side would be over. I had to fast forward to the very end to flip it over to play the B side for the rest of the album. I fell in love with the story of that album in middle school. High school comes around. Still love the music. Still love that album, but we now have CDs. So I find myself repurchasing the same album on CD. I get to college, and we don't have CD players anymore in anybody's dorm rooms, so I find myself rebuying this album again on some type of digital platform so that I could have it in my collection. You know what changed in all of that? The story, the actual music, the thing to share did not change. It remained the same the entire time of every medium that I had that album on. But what changed was how we heard it, how we were able to share it with others. So when I tell somebody, I love this album, I think you would be a really good person to appreciate and listen to this, I have a way now to share it with them in a way that they're going to be able to easily take home, play it in whatever way is going to work for them, and not be married to, well, I listened to it on a cassette in 1995, therefore if you want to appreciate this album, you too must listen to it on a cassette. Good luck finding a tape player in 2019 somewhere. But I loved that album, and I still do. And I found myself not being married to the equipment, to the medium that let me share that story. I fell in love with the actual story. These fishermen on this story this morning of Jesus going and gathering his first disciples to go out and do ministry in their region of Galilee. Starts off with him already having a few, and he's going to go get a few more. It's very important that we understand the cultural significance of what disciples were. Every young Jewish boy was brought up hoping that they would someday become a rabbi. So their family found a local rabbi for them to follow, and they became a disciple of this rabbi. But eventually that rabbi would start to wean the list of people who got cut, who weren't smart enough, who weren't quick enough, who weren't wise enough, who just weren't good enough. So what happens when you find out you're no longer on the path to become a rabbi? Well, you go back and you did what your family did. You fished. You built stuff. You farmed. You did what the family occupation was, because at some point on the road, somebody told you, you know what? You're just not good enough. You're not up to snuff to pass the cut to be one of my disciples. So Jesus, God incarnate, who has come down to put on human garb, goes and finds his disciples. He doesn't find the best. He doesn't find the ones who have passed all the tests from other rabbis. He goes and finds the ones who were told at some point, guess what? You're not good enough. So they go back and they do what their family has been doing for generations. We find these particular people out fishing. Now, if you have gone fishing before, but some of you have gone fishing with junky equipment, and your line on your reel gets all netted up every time you try and cast it, or it's been sitting in somebody's garage for 15, 20 years, and the line is super brittle and breaks every time you get a nibble on your line. If you don't have the most up-to-date equipment when you go fishing, what's going to happen? You're not going to catch any fish. You're going to be frustrated. You're going to be annoyed. You're going to be saying, I don't want to do this ever again. So these fishermen knew how important their equipment was to keep on doing the story of what their family had been doing forever. Fishing. If you don't have good equipment, you don't catch any fish. You don't feed your family. You don't support your community. You are not able to continue the story of what your people have been doing because your equipment is not up to snuff. These disciples wanted to make sure, as they were fishermen, wanted to make sure that the tools they were using were the most effective. So you can start to see how easy it is for Jesus to say, let me take some practical thing you've already been doing in life, and then for me to apply it to what you'll be doing for me as we go out into this world to do ministry together. You know how to fish. So we can easily look at that and say, oh, he's going to help them teach how to fish for people. Follow me and I'll teach you how to bring people in. That's a beautiful imagery for us, but we often miss what these disciples, what these active fishermen were doing when they were called. They weren't out throwing nets and pulling them in to grab more fish. They weren't out doing the thing that they know how to do best. They were mending their nets, knowing that if their equipment, if the way that they engaged in this occupation was not at its best, they would not to be able to carry on their story of how to fish. See, Jesus takes these fishermen, these people whose muscle memory is to do this, is to throw this net out off the boat and pull fish in. He uses what they already know how to do to help them be effective disciples in the world. He doesn't say, hey, drop your net, come with me, and I'm going to reteach you everything that you were supposed to have learned as you were a little Hebrew boy following around a rabbi. Come with me, and I'll reteach you how to be a scribe. Come with me, and I'll make sure you know how to read the Torah up and down, left and right, back and forward perfectly. Come with me, and I'll teach you how to go into the synagogue properly and correctly. He doesn't say any of that to these young boys at this point. He says, come with me. Take the muscle memory, take the equipment of casting a net and bring it with you as we engage in ministry together. Friends, we often think about how it is that we are going to grow the church. How are we going to follow this story of going out and being disciples and telling people about the gospel of Jesus Christ, to bring them in, not into our walls, but bring them into a life of faith that we know is filling and whole and leads to a promising life here on earth. We ask that question all the time. How are we going to do that? And churches often say these things. Well, we need more kids. We need more young people. We need a dynamic associate pastor to come in here and do things with our congregation. We need all of these things from the outside in order for us to be able to do effective ministry. But not these guys. Not these random people who were out sitting on a boat mending and casting nets. They take the tools that they already have. The muscle memory of their body already knows how to do. To throw the net out, to cast it, to pull it in, to work on it, to update it, to make sure that it is an effective tool for ministry. Friends, in your hands right now, in these pews right now, you already have the tools to go and be effective disciples in this world. God has given us a tremendous amount of gifts. They are already here present with us for us to go and tell the story that we already know. Not to find a new story, not to switch from the Wu-Tang album that I love to find another group, but to keep that story and move it through in finding new and effective ways to engage more people in that story. Those are our nets. Those are our tools that we will use as we become anglers, as we learn how to fish, to help share this story of hope, share this story of love, share this story of promise for us and for this world. Friends, stay on your boat, stay on your shore, stay in the places that you know well, but use your tools that God has given you as you cast nets out, as you repair things that haven't worked so well recently but were great in the past, as you continue to tell the story that you already know well. Go out into this world and be Christ's disciples, sharing the gospel, sharing the love, sharing that beautiful story that has gathered all of us here this morning. Amen.